The parking lot lights hummed overhead, casting a pale glow on rows of cars that had long since emptied out. In the corner, tucked between a rusted pickup and a shopping cart corral, sat a van that hadn't run properly in months. Inside, Rachel pulled her coat tighter around her little boy, hoping her own body heat might make up for the broken heater. His breath came out in small clouds, fading in the dark. "Mom, are we going home soon?" he whispered, his voice thin with sleep. Rachel forced a smile, brushing his hair back. "This is home tonight, sweetheart. Try to rest." She kept her tone gentle, but inside, her chest ached. The last of her change jingled faintly in her pocket, barely enough for a cup of gas station coffee. Dinner had been crackers and tap water from the restroom. Through the frosted window, she could see the glow of a restaurant across the street. Laughter spilled out each time the door opened, along with the rich smell of roasted chicken and warm bread. Rachel's stomach tightened, but not for herself. She thought only of the boy in her arms, his small body curled against hers as if trying to disappear into her coat. She closed her eyes, whispering a silent promise. "Tomorrow has to be better. I'll find a way." And just then the sound of raised voices drifted from the restaurant doors, cutting through the winter night. People were gathering, phones lifted, eyes locked on something happening at the entrance. Rachel sat up straighter, curiosity battling exhaustion. She didn't know it yet, but whatever was unfolding across that street was about to change her life forever. From her spot in the van, Rachel shifted her son gently onto the seat and leaned forward, peering through the fogged glass. The crowd outside the restaurant had grown. At the centre of it all was a young man in a tailored coat, down on one knee, holding a small box in his hands. Even from across the street, Rachel could feel the weight of the moment. He looked nervous, his hand trembling as he opened the box. A ring sparkled under the streetlight, and his voice carried just enough for people nearby to hear. "Will you marry me?" he asked, his eyes locked on the woman standing in front of him. The crowd hushed, breath held, waiting. For a heartbeat, it felt like a scene from one of those romantic movies Rachel used to watch on old DVDs, but then reality hit hard. The woman, dressed in a sleek black dress, folded her arms and laughed. Not the kind of laugh that comes from joy, but one sharp and cutting. This tiny ring," she said, her voice rising so everyone could hear. "Are you serious, Leo? If you can't afford something better, then you're not the man I thought you were." Gasps rippled through the onlookers. A few people shook their heads. Others pulled out their phones, recording. Rachel's heart clenched. She knew humiliation when she saw it. The young man's face turned red as he stammered, trying to explain, but the woman cut him off with another laugh, colder than the night air. "If you don't have money for a real ring, we have nothing to talk about," she snapped, and with that she turned on her heel and disappeared into the crowd. Silence hung heavy for a moment. The man's shoulders sagged, his eyes dark with pain. Then, with a sudden burst of anger, he ripped the ring from its box and hurled it into the street. Rachel flinched as the small piece of jewellery skittered across the asphalt, glinting under the streetlight. It rolled to a stop just a few feet from her van. She stared, wide-eyed. Her son stirred, waking just enough to mumble, "Mom, what's that?" Rachel swallowed hard, staring at the little circle of gold that had just been tossed away. She had no idea that the choice she was about to make, whether to pick it up or leave it lying there, would set her life on a path she never imagined. For a long moment, Rachel just stared at the ring glinting on the pavement. Cars passed in the distance, their headlights sweeping across the lot, but no one else seemed to notice. To everyone else, it was just a piece of jewellery tossed away in anger. To Rachel, it felt like a crossroads. Her little boy leaned forward, pressing his palm against the cold window. "Mom, it's shiny," he whispered, his eyes wide. Rachel's chest tightened. She could have kept it, maybe pawned it the next morning, bought food, maybe even paid for a motel for one night. The thought was tempting, so tempting her hands trembled as she slid open the van door. The cold air rushed in as she stepped out. She crouched and picked up the ring, the metal icy against her skin. For a second, she let herself imagine what it would mean to have something valuable, to not be invisible, to not have to beg or scrape together change. But then she looked back at her son's face pressed against the window, and guilt washed over her. Across the street, the man was heading toward his car, shoulders slumped, the box still in his hand but empty now. Rachel bit her lip. Everything in her life had been taken from her, her job, her apartment, her pride, but she still had one thing left, the choice to be honest. "Stay here," she whispered to her son, then clutched the ring tightly and crossed the street. Her steps were unsure at first, but with every stride she grew more certain. "Sir!" she called out, her voice breaking the night. "Wait!" The man paused, turning slowly, his eyes tired, his face pale under the streetlight. Rachel stopped a few feet away, holding the ring out in her trembling hand. "This belongs to you," she said softly. I couldn't just keep it." For a moment he only stared at her, at the worn coat too thin for the weather, at the van behind her, at the little boy watching through the glass. Something in his expression shifted, surprise mixing with curiosity. "Keep it," he muttered, rolling down his car window. "Sell it if you want. Maybe it'll help you more than it helped me." Rachel hesitated, her throat tightened, but instead of pocketing the ring, she whispered, "Don't give up on love, not because of this." The man blinked, as if the words hit him harder than he expected. For the first time that night, his gaze softened. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Rachel." He exhaled, almost a sigh, then reached for his wallet and held out a few bills. "Get something warm to eat, Rachel." Her fingers brushed his as she took the money, and for a fleeting second, their eyes met. Two strangers, each carrying their own kind of brokenness. Rachel stepped back, clutching both the ring and the cash. She didn't know why, but for the first time in a long time, she felt something stir inside her. It wasn't comfort, it wasn't certainty, it was hope. That night, Rachel sat in the van with the ring and the folded bills still in her hands. Her son slept soundly beside her, his small body wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of laundry detergent from a stranger's donation box. The parking lot was quiet now, but Rachel's mind wouldn't rest. She could have walked into the diner down the block and ordered a hot meal. She could have booked a night in a cheap roadside motel, let her boy shower in clean water and sleep in a real bed. But she had seen too many people in her situation burn through a little luck in a single night, only to end up right back where they started by morning. Rachel stared at the ring. It seemed absurd that something so small could hold so much weight. But what stayed with her more than the sparkle of gold was the look on the man's face, the way his hope had crumbled, the way her words had made him pause. She whispered into the dark, as if making a vow no one else could hear. "I'm not going to waste this." When the first light of dawn crept into the sky, Rachel tucked the ring safely away and walked her boy to the corner store. With careful hands, she counted out just enough of the bills to buy a small carton of coffee, a bag of sugar, some disposable cups, and a package of muffins. It wasn't much, but it was a start. By 7, she was standing near the entrance of the train station, her boy bundled in a hoodie, holding the bag of muffins. Commuters hurried past, briefcases in hand, scarves tight around their necks. Most didn't look at her. Some frowned, assuming she was asking for change. Rachel's cheeks burned, but she lifted her voice anyway. "Fresh coffee and muffins, warm and ready for the morning." For a while no one stopped. Doubt gnawed at her. Maybe this was foolish. Maybe she should have taken that hot meal last night after all. But then a janitor in a faded work jacket slowed his step. He studied Rachel for a moment, then smiled gently. "How much for the coffee?" Her throat tightened as she forced her voice steady. $1, sir." He handed her a $2 bill. "Keep the change. Looks like you're working hard." Rachel blinked back tears as she poured the steaming coffee into a cup. It wasn't just the money, it was the dignity of earning it. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was standing up instead of reaching out. As the man walked away, sipping his coffee, Rachel glanced down at her son. He grinned, proud, holding the muffins like they were treasure. And for the first time in years, Rachel's heart whispered a different kind of promise. Maybe tomorrow really can be better. The morning rush came and went, and Rachel stood shivering in the cool air with her nearly empty bag of muffins. To her surprise, most of them had sold. Commuters who had ignored her at first began to soften when they saw her steady smile, her little boy passing cups of coffee with both hands like it was the most important job in the world. By noon, she counted her earnings, just a handful of crumpled bills and coins, but more than she had seen in a single day in a long time. Her boy clapped his hands and laughed. "We did it, Mum!" His joy made the ache in her feet and the chill in her bones fade. That evening, Rachel sat in the van, dividing the money carefully. Some for food, some to buy more supplies for tomorrow, and a small part she set aside, almost sacred, as if it were proof that she was moving forward. The next morning, she returned to the same spot. The first hour was slow, but then faces she recognised from the day before started appearing. A tired office worker smiled shyly. "Got any more of that coffee?" A group of students bought muffins on their way to class, giggling as they shared bites. Even a bus driver waved her over to sell him a cup before he started his route. Each transaction stitched a little more hope into her heart. This wasn't charity, this was work, honest work. As the sun climbed higher, a familiar car slowed near the curb. Rachel's breath caught. The window rolled down, and there he was, the man from the restaurant, the one whose life had collided with hers in the strangest way. Daniel. He stepped out, hands in his pockets, looking more tired than she remembered. His eyes swept over the small table Rachel had set up, the steaming coffee, her son helping with a grin. A smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "You're really doing this," he said almost to himself. Rachel nodded, unsure what else to say. She braced for judgment, but his voice was gentle. "Most people would have pawned that ring and walked away, but you started something." Her cheeks warmed. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "It isn't much, but it's ours." Daniel chuckled softly, pulling out a few bills. "Then I'll take 2 muffins and a coffee, black." Her boy rushed to fill the order, proud as ever. Daniel accepted the cup, watching them both with an expression Rachel couldn't quite read, something between admiration and curiosity. As he turned to leave, he paused. "Keep going, Rachel, you're onto something." She stood there for the long moment after his car pulled away, the sound of his words echoing louder than the city around her. For the first time, she didn't just feel like she was surviving, she felt like she was beginning. The days settled into a fragile routine. Rachel woke long before sunrise, brewing coffee in a borrowed church kitchen, wrapping muffins in paper bags, and setting up near the train station. Little by little, her spot became familiar. The bus driver waved, office workers smiled when they saw her, and students joked about her muffins being better than anything downtown. Her son loved greeting customers. "This is our shop," he'd say proudly, holding out change with both hands. Every laugh, every kind word stitched a little more hope into Rachel's tired heart. But late one afternoon, as the rush faded and she packed her supplies into the van, she noticed something tucked under the windshield wiper. A bright orange slip fluttered in the wind. Her stomach dropped the second she read it. "Final notice, vehicle to be repossessed." Her chest tightened. The van wasn't just transportation. It was their home, their storage, their safety net. Without it, she and her son would be back on the street. That night, parked in the far corner of a grocery store lot, Rachel sat in the driver's seat, staring at the notice in her lap. Her boy leaned against her shoulder, drifting to sleep, unaware of the storm pressing down on her. She whispered into the silence almost like a prayer. "Not now, please, not now." The next morning, she still showed up at the station, forcing a smile as she poured coffee and handed out muffins. Customers laughed, chatted, and moved on with their day, never seeing the fear Rachel carried in her pocket. She tried to act normal, but her hands shook each time she counted change. By mid-morning, a familiar car pulled to the curb. Daniel stepped out, his sharp eyes scanning her face. Something about her forced smile made him pause. He didn't say anything at first, just waited. Rachel swallowed hard, slipping the orange slip deeper into her coat pocket. She wasn't ready to admit the truth. Not yet. Daniel lingered by the table longer than usual that morning. He bought his coffee, exchanged a few words with Rachel's boy, but his eyes kept drifting back to her. He noticed how her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, how her hands trembled when she poured. "Rachel," he said gently, "what's going on?" She shook her head quickly, forcing cheer. "Nothing, just tired, that's all." But Daniel didn't look convinced. He leaned against the table, lowering his voice. "You're working harder than anyone I know, but today, it feels like you're somewhere else." Rachel swallowed, her throat tight. The orange slip in her pocket felt heavy as stone. She wanted to keep the secret a little longer, to solve it herself. Pride was all she had left. She packed up a muffin bag for a customer, waited until they walked away, then finally pulled the folded paper from her coat. Her hands shook as she held it out. Daniel read it in silence, his jaw tightened. "They're going to take your van?" Rachel hugged her arms around herself, staring at the ground. "It's our home, our shelter. But I can't make the payment, not with what I earn right now." Her voice cracked and she quickly bit her lip to stop it. "I don't want to be rescued, Daniel. I just don't know how much more I can take." For a long moment, Daniel said nothing. The crowd around them thinned as the morning rush passed, leaving the three of them standing in the cool air. Finally, he folded the slip and handed it back to her. "You're not weak for asking for help," he said firmly. "You've carried more on your shoulders than most people could in a lifetime. Let me stand with you. Not because you can't, but because you shouldn't have to do this alone." Rachel blinked, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall. She shook her head. "What if I can't pay you back?" Daniel's answer was simple. "Then pay it forward. One day to someone else. That's enough for me." Her boy tugged her sleeve just then, holding up a crumpled dollar bill from another smiling commuter. "See, Mum? We're earning it." Rachel let out a shaky laugh, brushing his hair back. She looked at Daniel again, seeing not pity in his eyes, but respect. And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe him. The week that followed felt different. With Daniel's quiet support, Rachel managed to keep the van. It wasn't glamorous, still old, still sputtering each time she turned the key, but it was theirs. That single victory gave her the strength to wake up even earlier, to brew more coffee, to bake more muffins in the tiny borrowed kitchen of a church that had offered her space. Word of mouth began to spread. Office workers started planning their mornings around the coffee lady at the station. A few even joked that Rachel's brew was stronger than the overpriced chains downtown. Rachel would laugh, her cheeks flushing, but inside she carried each word like fuel. Her little boy took his job seriously. He'd greet commuters with a grin, sometimes slipping in a "have a good day" that made people smile before their long train rides. More than once, Rachel caught strangers softening when they looked at him, maybe because they saw their own kids in his bright eyes. One morning, as Rachel handed a cup of coffee to a woman in a navy blazer, she heard the sound of a familiar car pulling up. Daniel stepped out, dressed for work, but less guarded than before. He waited until the line of customers thinned, then walked over with his usual order. "Business looks good," he said, watching her son count change with both hands. Rachel nodded. "Better than I imagined." Daniel leaned on the edge of the table, lowering his voice. "I talked to a few people at my office. They want to place an order for a morning meeting next week. Coffee and muffins for about 20 people. Think you can handle that?" Rachel froze, the cup in her hand trembling slightly. 20. That was more than she'd ever made in a single day. I think I can," she said, her voice catching. Daniel smiled. "I know you can." The words settled in her chest like warmth she hadn't felt in years. For the first time, someone wasn't just offering pity, he was offering belief. That night, as she tucked her boy into the van, Rachel whispered, "We're going to do it. We're really going to do it." He smiled sleepily, already drifting off. "We're a team, Mum." Rachel lay awake long after, listening to his even breathing. The fear was still there, the uncertainty still heavy, but now it lived side by side with something new: hope. The week after the office order, Rachel felt something she hadn't known in years: momentum. Each morning, she sold out faster. Commuters greeted her by name, and her son had memorized how to make change without help. At night, she counted the bills carefully, whispering to herself, "We're going to make it." But not everyone was glad to see her. One chilly evening, as Rachel folded her table, a sleek black sedan pulled to the curb. A tall woman stepped out, heels clicking against the pavement. Her hair was perfect, her coat expensive. Rachel recognized her instantly. The woman from the restaurant, Daniel's ex. Rachel's chest tightened. She tried to focus on stacking cups, but the woman's voice carried easily. "Daniel," she called, spotting him across the sidewalk. He had just parked and was walking over with his usual easy stride. His face stiffened when he saw her. "I came to talk," the woman said smoothly. Her eyes flicked to Rachel for the briefest moment, a glance sharp enough to sting before returning to Daniel. "You've been avoiding me." Daniel's jaw tightened, because there's nothing left to say. She tilted her head, her smile faint and practiced. "We both know that isn't true. You don't belong here, Daniel, not on sidewalks, not standing next to..." She let the sentence trail off, but her gaze swept over Rachel's modest table, the dented thermos and the boy holding muffin bags like they were gold. Rachel's face flushed hot. She lowered her eyes, pretending to fuss with a stack of napkins, but the words cut anyway. Daniel stepped closer, his voice firm. "Stop! You made your choice. Don't come here acting like you know what's best for me." The woman's smile wavered, but she pressed on. "This isn't your world, Daniel. It never will be." She gave Rachel one last look, polite on the surface, cruel underneath, before turning back to her car. Silence settled as the taillights faded. Rachel's hands shook around the stack of cups. Daniel turned toward her, concern in his eyes, but she avoided his gaze. "I should finish packing," she murmured, her voice unsteady. That night, as her son slept beside her, Rachel lay awake replaying those words. "This isn't your world," she whispered into the dark. "Maybe she's right. Maybe I don't belong." The morning after the encounter with Daniel's ex, Rachel tried to carry on as if nothing had happened. She smiled at customers, poured coffee, and let her boy hand out muffins with his usual cheer. But beneath the surface, doubt gnawed at her. Every kind word from a passerby felt fragile, every laugh too easy to break. She couldn't shake the question that kept circling her mind: am I really enough? By mid-afternoon, the answer seemed to come in the harshest way. When Rachel returned to the parking lot, her heart lurched. The van, her shelter, her storage, her only home, was hitched to the back of a tow truck. A man in a reflective vest scribbled notes on a clipboard, not even glancing at her. "Wait!" Rachel cried, running forward. "Please, you can't take it." The man shook his head. "Miss, this vehicle is in default. Unless you can pay the balance today, it's gone." Her son clung to her hand, his eyes wide and wet. "Mom, where will we sleep?" Rachel's knees nearly gave out. She begged, pleaded, but the truck pulled away, the taillights fading into the distance. She stood frozen in the empty space it left behind, the cold pavement pressing through her worn shoes, her boy's small fingers gripping hers. Tears blurred her vision. Everything she had fought for, every early morning, every cup poured with pride, suddenly felt like it was slipping through her hands. She pulled her boy close, burying her face in his hair, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. That evening, Daniel found her sitting on the curb outside the station, a cardboard box beside her with the last of her supplies. Her son leaned against her shoulder, asleep from exhaustion. "Rachel," Daniel said softly, crouching down. She looked up, her eyes red. "They took it. Everything's gone. I don't know what to do." For a long moment, Daniel didn't speak. He just looked at her. The determination that had carried her this far, now crushed under a weight too heavy for one person to bear. Finally, his voice broke the silence, steady and certain. "Then you're coming with me. You and your boy. You're not spending another night out here?" Rachel shook her head quickly. "I can't. What if people think I'm..." "I don't care what people think," Daniel cut in, his tone firm but gentle. "I care about you, and I won't stand by while you fall apart." Rachel's throat tightened. Pride screamed at her to refuse, but when she looked at her son curled against her side, she knew she couldn't, not this time. She nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Just promise me this isn't pity." Daniel reached out, brushing one tear away with his thumb. "It's not pity, Rachel. It's respect, and maybe something more." That night, for the first time in months, Rachel and her boy didn't fall asleep in a van. They slept under a roof, in a warm room with clean sheets. As Rachel lay in the dark, she whispered to herself a single word that felt almost foreign: safe. The first morning in Daniel's house felt almost unreal. Sunlight spilled through clean curtains, warming the soft blankets around Rachel's shoulders. Her boy was sprawled across the other side of the bed, breathing deeply, his face relaxed in a way she hadn't seen in years. He looked younger, lighter, like a child who finally felt safe. Rachel sat on the edge of the bed, her feet sinking into the plush carpet. For months, she had woken to the sound of passing traffic and the cold bite of metal against her back. Now, the smell of coffee drifted up from downstairs, rich and inviting. For a moment she let herself breathe it in, savouring the comfort. But then the unease crept in. She wasn't supposed to be here. This was Daniel's home, not hers. The whispers of that woman's voice echoed in her mind. Don't throw it away for someone who sells coffee on the sidewalk. Her chest tightened. Was she just a burden to him? A charity project? When she finally made her way downstairs, she found Daniel in the kitchen, sliding scrambled eggs onto plates. He looked up, smiling. Morning, you two must have slept better than you have in a while. Rachel managed a small nod. Better than I thought possible. Daniel pulled out a chair for her. Eat. You need your strength. As she sat, Rachel traced her fingers along the smooth edge of the table. It felt strange, eating a meal she hadn't earned, in a house that wasn't hers. She swallowed hard before whispering, Daniel, I don't want you to think I'm taking advantage. I don't belong here. Daniel set down his fork, meeting her eyes. Rachel, listen to me. You're not a guest out of pity. You're here because you need safety and you deserve it. Everyone does. Her throat tightened. What will people say if they find out? She hesitated, searching for the words. You're someone important, and You're Rachel, he interrupted, his voice steady. The woman who's been getting up at 4 every morning to build something out of nothing. That's more important to me than any title or bank account. Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them back, forcing a shaky smile. I just don't ever want my son to feel like he doesn't belong. Daniel leaned forward, his tone gentle but sure. Then we'll make sure he does, both of you. Rachel sat quietly for a moment, the weight of his words settling into her heart. Maybe she hadn't been wrong to accept his help. Maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something she could trust. The night of Daniel's company fundraiser arrived faster than Rachel expected. The hotel ballroom glowed under chandeliers, waiters moved gracefully with trays of wine, and every guest seemed polished, confident, and perfectly at home. Rachel smoothed the simple navy dress Daniel had helped her pick out. It wasn't expensive, but it fit her well, and for once she didn't feel invisible. Still, as she walked in beside Daniel, she kept her chin high to mask the nerves tumbling in her stomach. She couldn't shake the memory of his ex's words, "You don't belong here." Daniel leaned close as they entered. "You're not here to blend in, Rachel. You're here because you deserve to be." His tone was steady, grounding her. Even so, she felt the weight of curious eyes. Whispers drifted. Polite smiles lingered a little too long. When Daniel stepped aside to greet a colleague, Rachel found herself standing near a small group of guests, their conversation pausing as they glanced at her. One man asked casually, "And what do you do, Rachel?" Her throat tightened. She could have dodged, kept it vague, but something in her refused to shrink back. "I run a small coffee stand near the train station," she said, her voice soft but clear. An awkward silence followed. Someone gave a polite smile, another raised their eyebrows. Rachel felt the heat rising in her cheeks, but before she could retreat, one woman tilted her head with interest. "You mean the one across from the bus stop? I've seen the line there, that's you." Rachel blinked. "Yes, it started with just a little money and a few muffins. Now I get regular customers every morning. It's not much, but it's honest." The woman smiled. "That's impressive. Starting from scratch isn't easy." For the first time that night, Rachel felt her shoulders loosen. But then a familiar voice slid into the circle. "Well, isn't this a surprise?" Rachel's stomach tightened as Daniel's ex approached, her gown shimmering under the lights, her glass of wine tilting delicately in her hand. She gave Rachel a cool once-over, her lips curving into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Daniel always did have a soft spot for underdog stories," she said sweetly. "But this..." Her gaze swept over Rachel's dress, then back to the group. "This feels a little out of place, doesn't it?" The guests shifted uncomfortably. Rachel's pulse pounded in her ears. She wanted to sink into the floor, but she remembered Daniel's words, "You deserve to be here." So she drew a breath, steadying her voice. I may not look like I belong in a ballroom, but every morning I show up, work hard, and build something piece by piece. That's where I belong, showing my son that you can keep moving forward, no matter how little you start with. The group went quiet. Even the ex seemed caught off guard for a moment, her smile flickering. Across the room, Daniel had noticed. He started making his way over, his eyes locked on Rachel, pride written clearly in his expression. Rachel didn't know it yet, but her words had already begun to turn the room in her favour. For a long moment, the circle of guests stayed silent after Rachel spoke. Then the woman in the silver shawl broke into a warm smile. That's exactly the kind of story we need more of. Anyone can flash money around, but building something from the ground up, that takes grit. A man in a grey suit nodded thoughtfully. I've seen her stand by the station, rain or shine. People line up. That kind of persistence, you don't teach that in business school. Rachel blinked, hardly believing the shift in tone. Where she had expected pity, she heard respect. But the calm didn't last. Daniel's ex leaned in again, her voice low, but sharp enough for everyone to hear. Come on, let's not pretend a coffee stand belongs in the same conversation as real business. This is charity at best, Daniel, and you know it. Rachel's chest tightened. The sting of her words brought back every doubt Rachel had carried since the night she lost her van. She opened her mouth, but before she could speak, Daniel stepped forward. That's enough, he said firmly, his voice cutting through the noise. All eyes turned toward him. His gaze was steady, not angry, but unshakably clear. Rachel doesn't need defending, but I won't let you diminish her. What she's built isn't charity, it's proof of character. Proof that when life knocks you down, you can stand back up stronger. The room quieted, guests exchanged looks, some nodding in agreement. Daniel continued, softer this time, his eyes never leaving Rachel. Honestly, I admire her more than anyone I've met in this room. She reminds me what really matters. Rachel felt the air shift. The smirk on his ex's face faltered, the sharpness in her eyes replaced by something brittle. She tried to laugh it off, but no one joined her. Instead, the guests began clapping, a few softly at first, then more firmly, the sound rolling through the circle. Rachel's cheeks burned, not from shame this time, but from a rush of something she hadn't felt in years. Pride. She didn't gloat, didn't throw back an insult. She simply lifted her chin, nodded politely, and said, I'm not ashamed of where I came from, and I'm proud of where I'm going. The applause grew. Daniel's ex stiffened, muttered something under her breath, and slipped away toward the bar, her heels clicking faster than before. Rachel exhaled, her shoulders trembling. Daniel caught her eye, his expression steady, proud, and warm all at once. And in that moment, surrounded by people who had once whispered doubts, Rachel realized she no longer felt like an outsider. She belonged. The fundraiser had ended, and the ballroom was nearly empty. Staff cleared tables, the hum of conversation faded to nothing, and only the glow of chandeliers remained. Rachel lingered near the back wall, still shaken from the night, though her heart carried a quiet pride she hadn't felt in years. Daniel walked toward her, his tie loosened, his expression softer than she'd ever seen it. You were incredible tonight, he said. Rachel gave a nervous laugh, glancing down at her hands. I thought my knees were going to give out. But they didn't, Daniel replied, his voice steady. You stood there, told the truth, and made them listen. That's more strength than most people in this room will ever know. Rachel hesitated, the old doubts creeping back. I kept thinking they'd laugh, that they'd only see the woman who used to live in a van. Daniel shook his head firmly. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. That's not what I see. I don't care where you came from. What matters is who you are now and who you're becoming. Her breath caught, the words sinking deeper than she expected. He went on, softer now, but every syllable sure. Rachel, this isn't about pity. You've changed the way I look at my own life. You've reminded me of what actually matters. And I don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose you. Rachel's eyes stung. For so long she had felt invisible, easy to discard. Hearing him speak with such clarity left her with nothing to hide behind. Her voice trembled, but she met his eyes. I don't have much to give. Daniel smiled gently. You've already given me more than you realise, and all I want is a chance to walk beside you, wherever this goes. For a moment, the quiet between them felt fuller than the ballroom had all evening. Rachel finally let herself exhale, the weight she'd carried for years loosening just a little. For the first time, she didn't feel like someone clinging to scraps of hope. She felt like a woman who had something real, and someone real, standing beside her. Months passed, and life slowly took on a new shape. Rachel no longer woke to the sound of traffic rattling the walls of an old van. She woke to her son's laughter echoing through a small, sunlit apartment that Daniel had helped her find, though the rent came from her own earnings. That mattered to her. She wanted to know she was standing on her own feet, not living in someone else's shadow. With Daniel's guidance and the encouragement of the customers who had once stopped at her little table, Rachel opened a tiny coffee shop on the corner of Main Street. The sign above the door was simple, hand-painted, Second Chances Cafe. On opening day, the place buzzed with life. Office workers who had bought her coffee at the station came to show support. A bus driver parked outside on his break just to grab a muffin. Even the janitor, who had been her very first paying customer, stopped by, shaking her hand like she'd won something grand. Her boy darted between tables, proudly telling anyone who would listen, "This is my mum's cafe." His joy filled the room like sunlight. As the crowd thinned, Daniel slipped in quietly, leaning against the counter with that familiar smile. "Looks like you've made it," he said. Rachel shook her head, wiping her hands on her apron. "No, I'm still making it, every day. That's the point." Daniel's eyes softened. "And you're not making it alone." She looked at him, her heart swelling with something she had been too afraid to name before. Gratitude, admiration, and yes, love. The kind of love that wasn't about rescue or charity, but about respect and partnership. That night, after the cafe closed, Rachel sat on the front step with her son curled against her side. The neon sign glowed above them, humming softly in the dark. "Mum," her boy murmured sleepily, "are we safe now?" Rachel kissed the top of his head, her eyes stinging. "Yes, sweetheart, we're safe." She glanced at Daniel, who sat beside them in the quiet, his hand finding hers. And for the first time in years, Rachel believed it, not just for tonight, but for every tomorrow still to come. Because sometimes the smallest acts, returning a ring, pouring a cup of coffee, can rewrite an entire story. And for Rachel, this was only the beginning. This story reminds us that second chances aren't about luck or charity. They're about courage, honesty, and refusing to give up. Sometimes, the smallest step forward can rewrite an entire life. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end of this story. I'm truly grateful for your time. If this story touched you, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need it. I'll see you again soon, right here on Rain Inside.